With a land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the late Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continuing empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. The first motion on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda, and the motion is as follows: that the content of the Special Strategic Initiative Standing Committee budget agenda for November 23rd, 2022 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? That would be Kathy Jeffrey and Deputy Mayor Fryer. Thank you. Next item on the agenda would be to ask if any of the members of council have a declaration of pecuniary interest to make today. Being none, if one should arise, please alert me. So the item we're here to discuss today is the budget, and what we're going to do today is hear firstly from our CAO, Sonia Skinner, and then our treasurer will then open it for public delegations, and then the standing committee will be able to ask questions and have discussion. So I'll just turn this out now over to CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say a couple of minutes of introductory remarks. First off, I did check with the treasurer to see if she had new shoes today. She said no, she has a growing family, no new shoes for her. But I have to put a plug in for Collingwood Fashion Week from the BIA. I did buy a new jacket just for the day. I hope it bodes well for finding a great budget as the council moves through the next few weeks and makes your decisions. This is intended to be a multi-way dialogue. So it's to and from staff and council, and very much to and from council and the public, because we're very much looking to have the public provide their context on the items that are important. Normally, and in years gone by, a meeting like this would be somewhat an exhaustive review of what each department does, and then we talk a little bit about all the costing of each project. And we thought this might not be the best use of your time or the public's, and most of these items are set out in this rather large budget book that if someone printed it could look through, and it is all in the materials for the meeting and online if anybody at home or in the gallery would like to see all of those details. That said, even though we're not going into items in detail for each department, if there are any questions, as I mentioned, it's a two-way dialogue, and we have all the right department heads and staff available in person or virtually to answer your questions. One thing I did want to cover is a bit of the context, some of the major decisions and projects that are just over the horizon. Council, in every likelihood, will want to update the community-based strategic plan. We're getting into 3 years of the 3-year plan that was tweaked by the last council. But of course, you haven't had the chance to update this yet. It has been a little bit of a baptism by fire, and here we are with you having the budget in front of you already, given it's at that time of year. It can be difficult because you haven't yet decided together about the sequence of your priorities. Would you do a downtown visioning first, or would you do a strategic plan first? And what comes before or after a comprehensive transportation plan, for example? So some of those things, it might be a more difficult year than normal to work out, but I'm sure with the dialogue, you're going to be able to do so. And other context are things that are coming up. We do have the grain terminals revitalization. There'll be some more public communication and dialogue shortly. And there is a potential for substantial town supports or contributions as we revitalize some public spaces on that the spit. We have the potential for multi-use rec facility and the types of investments that you might like to make in the coming years. We have the potential for an art center and likewise the investments you might like to make. We have our affordable housing master plan in the throes of being awarded to what seems like some very qualified companies, and potentially further work by the task force that may trigger investments. We have our full asset management plan, including the non-core assets that will come forward in 2023. We have some recent bills from the provincial government that are potentially going to change what's available to you from a growth perspective with respect to development charges, potentially other fees. And the county has a study underway, which is much needed around addressing homelessness in our area that may lead to investments. So these kind of things are not in the budget that you see in front of you, but I think it's part of that broader context that you need to be aware of. This is truly doing what none of us can do alone for our community. And I do want to talk about taxes and tax increases. An insufficient tax increase means less for the future. And I totally understand that you must balance the needs of the community and those residents who voted with the needs. An increase that doesn't meet inflation does mean that we'll need to look for cuts from the current levels of services or innovative changes. And there is, of course, with those items I just mentioned on the horizon, we might have to cut very deeply to fund a few of those if there's insufficient dollars in the pot. And I do also want to emphasize that while sometimes studies seem slow, it seems hard to go through a MRF study or affordable housing study, and there may be reasons to cut some of those short. Sometimes we really need to know what the whole community needs so that you can figure out, how many pads need to be in that ice rink or the seats you need in the arts center or whether you need a bylaw officer or not. So some of those things do make sense to prioritize into certain years and roll out. Our town is getting things done. We've had great councils and great volunteers, and I think we have some outstanding staff to take up the mantle on whatever you decide today and in the weeks to come on this budget for 2023. I got a couple of tips and tricks for you, things you might not see at first blush in reading through a budget. A lot of the budget goes on a little bit below the waterline. You'll see it in the text of the business plans and potentially in the charts that are provided for you. Most of the work is in the ongoing delivery of services. Public Works is out plowing roads and filling potholes, and people at the pool are heating the pool water and paying the lifeguards. And we don't highlight all of those items typically in the budget. They're there. If we need to talk about them, we can. And another thing that's often not highlighted, potentially enough, by us as staff is that many things are delivered by existing staff resources or ongoing operational funding. So it may have been already approved by previous council or be something that we're doing, already delivering. An example of that might be the affordable housing master plan, in that the funding has already been approved and it's in flight. So we haven't asked you again if you'd like to continue, because it's something that, of course, is important and is ongoing. And I would emphasize that the changes in money spent are not always equivalent to the transformational effort. Sometimes council will tell us they really need something done, and we're able to do it with our existing staff resources. An example of that might be the pivot in the past year and a half with the Unity Collective in trying to make sure that we'd addressed the Black Lives Matter items and the what we heard in the march at the beginning of COVID, and some of our work with our much valued Indigenous communities. So when council sets a priority, it's not always a money priority. Sometimes you just set us priorities, and we're able to do that with our existing resources. There will be an operational plan that sets out the work that's moving forward early in the new year, so you'll be able to see all that work. And If, in fact, there are decisions in year that you wish to make, once the tax rate is set, you can't change that, but there's much flexibility for council in year. Should it come as a council direction, should you wish to reallocate funds, use your reserves, or other transparent decisions you may wish to make. The asset management planning is very important, and the previous council got some very good presentations on that from our treasurer. But essentially, it's a multi-year smoothing of investments. It's not going to be a surprise that the pool needs to be replaced in X years, or that a certain road that's expensive needs to be done. We know every year that a certain amount of money should be allocated to roads, and that's transparently provided to you, roads or other assets. And another thing for my tips and tricks list is don't be fooled by a tax rate. You really want to ask probing questions about what that means to someone who's paying taxes. So if someone's paying $1,000 or $2,000 in their land taxes today, what does that rate really mean for that homeowner, so that you understand what the difference is out of someone's pocket toward what types of investments or new services you want to have in our community. Finally, we did start this budget journey with the managers and department heads this past summer. We looked at all the proposals. I can't remember the starting percent, but it was somewhere around 20%. So we didn't think that you wanted that to come forward directly. So there's been some voting and hard discussions to figure out what should be in front of you today. And it's possible that you, particularly as a new council, will come up with items that are not already listed. And that's in part why the dialogue is starting here with this first draft and your chance to input over several drafts. We have a wonderful treasurer. She worked in the auto industry in an executive position. She was the treasurer in Wasaga Beach. She had her own business providing financial services to many of our local employers, and now has 2 years with us. So you're in very good hands as I turn it over to her to walk you through the actual changes that are in your package and what each of them will mean. And I will just close with saying that this is a two-way dialogue. We're very much looking to hear from you and from our residents and businesses today and over the coming weeks.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you, CEO Skinner. I think that was all really good context, and we'll start our journey today. So good afternoon, Your Worship and members of council, and welcome to your first ever 2023 budget presentation. And I'm sure there'll be several more. I'm sorry to be the one that comes between you and the historic moment that our country is receiving today with the World Cup Soccer first game that we've been in over 30 years. But I do hope you'll find that this time is well spent, although maybe not as entertaining, or maybe it is entertaining, I don't know. But we certainly apologize for that because we didn't know before we set the meeting. So that for sure will come into play. What we're about to present, I feel, is a fair and reasonable budget. It's a great first step in providing the services that our residents have come to grow on and learn and do the things that they need to do while we do the things that staff need to do. I want to share that it is very much a collaborative effort. This is a corporate-wide, every manager, every department head across the organization gets together to do this work. So we all know that it is very important work, but it is a lot of time and effort and a lot of thought goes into it. So it certainly, as CEO Skinner mentioned, started back in August, and here we are in November, and just presenting to you our very first draft. I also wanted to share that we changed our team up a bit in finance. So this year, for probably the first time since Jen's come on to our team, she's been a great part of the budget itself and is the manager of finance, and she's sitting right here. And also one of our financial analysts, Stephanie Ottawell. Again, very corporate-wide, but some special attention in the finance team to get this book together. We do have a big agenda today, so we're going to start off with the budget process. We talked a little bit about it in council orientation. We're going to walk you through an economic update, highlights of the presentation that we're sharing today and what's included in your book. We'll speak a little bit about the efficiencies that have been gained over the past year and included in the 2023 budget. And then we'll wrap it up with a review of capital and also the proposed motions that we've put into the deck today. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the first 3 months of budget prep, and you did see this during your council orientation, and I've printed out packages for you because as the graphs get a little bit bigger, it's difficult to see them on your screen here. So please, if you need to turn your back to look at the screen, please do so or use your package. So just as a reminder, our budget process started in August. We launched a public survey. We did some work at the farmers market to try and get people engaged and using the survey. And then we started to prepare, or staff started to prepare, all the budget requests and reviews of the master plans or priorities they have for their individual divisions. In September, we moved on with an SIC staff report, which kind of gave just an economic overview, what was happening in the world around us and kind of what was happening within the town as well. We had a staff workshop where all managers and department heads were together to talk about their priorities, to talk about that giant list that CAO Skinner pointed out, that was in the neighborhood of likely 20% when we first started to where we're at today. And of course, we closed that public survey. We moved into October. We had an SIC staff report again, which laid out the results of that public survey and also sort of a highlighted list of what those major requests were that were going to come forward through the budget process. And again, we just continued with budget preparation and meetings and working with individual managers and department heads to try and come up with something that made sense and aligned with the strat plans that are currently in place. Next slide. So here we are in November, the very first draft that members of council will be seeing and the public. Of course, we covered portions of what a budget means and how it will impact everybody in the council orientation. And I hope that what we provide today is a good summary of the materials that we've given to you earlier on last week. And as we move through December, our expectation is that a second draft, and I skipped over the most important part, is that we have a public meeting next Monday, which we're calling a Coffee with Council, where we'll do a short presentation, not quite as long as what I'm going to share today, and hope that we hear from members of the public. From 1 to 3 on Monday will be a virtual session where you'll be able to speak to members of the public and interact with members of council as well. And then in the evening, there's a in-person session at the library from 6 to 8. So we're hoping to get as much coverage and as many people out to those events as we can. And now we'll move to December. In December, the expectation is that we'll bring the second draft of the budget on December 5th and then carry on with any other drafts as we go through the month of December. And of course, we'll have a little shutdown in between Christmas and New Year. And the hope is that by January 9th, we could bring a final draft to the SIC meeting and hold a special council that evening to adopt the budget. That's the ultimate goal. Doesn't mean it's the only way it can happen, but certainly that it would be the goal of staff. Next slide, please. We shared this a little bit during the council orientation as well and what the budget process means. I mean, there's a lot of steps and we've walked you through the months, but it does start with input from staff and members of the public and as well as members of council. We then look at the environment around us. We look at what financial indicators are saying. We look at the type of situations that staff are dealing with, the services that we provide. We also look forward to the future and try and tie and make sure that our plans are incorporated within our future planning as well. We do lots of preparatory work, again, corporate-wide. All DHs and managers do a ton of work to try and get the information into a value-added situation, and then we provide output, which is what we provided you with last week with the budget book itself. And then now we're looking for feedback. And feedback will not only come from members of council, but of course at our November 28th public presentation, we're looking for feedback from the public as well. And then the whole loop will start again, and we'll do the same thing and hopefully eventually get to a point where we can all agree on something that's fair and reasonable. So next slide, please. So there's been a lot of talk lately about inflation, and I'm sure you're all aware about, the situation in terms of what the cost of goods are going up and where interest rates are going. So right now, the Consumer Price Index is at 6.5%. That's the latest as of October 2022, and that includes fuel, energy, and food. Now, what we also tend to look at, just to try and basket the goods, is what we call core CPI, or core Consumer Price Index, and it's at 5.1%. And what it does is it pulls out energy and food, because as we all know, those are the biggest, or maybe don't know of it, those are the biggest drivers of what CPI, as it increases. Energy and food tend to be at the higher end. But even when we pull out those very volatile pieces of the Consumer Price Index, it's still quite high. 5.1% is probably the highest we've seen in, I would say, probably 3 decades. So it still continues to push us in terms of the things that we're going to look at when we get into the unavoidable changes that we've showed through the budget book. We also have, and I know everybody loves our acronyms, the NRB CPI, which is Non-Residential Building Construction Price Index. So what that means is it's similar to the Consumer Price Index, but it's specific to non-residential type buildings. So rec centers and town halls and things along those lines that we would be building. And this year, or in this quarter, it grew by 15.6%, which is quite the whopper. Big difference over last year, although last year increased by over 11%. So in the last 2 years, we're nearly at 30% in terms of the construction price index. That's huge. From a residential side, it's actually 25%. So it's quite a difference, but certainly a huge impact. And of course, as everybody knows, the interest rates are increasing, and at this point, the prime rate is at 5.95. If we would have been talking in May, we were at below 2%. So it's a huge difference. Lots of changes happening outside in the environment that we deal with. Next slide, please. So we're going to move into the budget that we're currently proposing. And you may have noticed in the budget package that we've changed. What we've included is a change from 2022 to 2023, and we've split it into 2 categories. The first category is unavoidable changes, and it equates to about a 1.78% tax rate increase. And when we refer to unavoidable changes, we're talking about things that generally staff and members of council have limited or very little control over, or they're the types of things that resolutions have been passed and projects are in motion. So some maybe there is a possibility to draw back, but certainly there would be a cost associated to do that. Next slide, please. So what this slide does is break down the information essentially into 2 separate tables. The top table shows you over the past 5 years the change in the municipal levy. And when I talk about municipal levy, what I mean is the taxes that we raise. So back in 2019, we were raising about 32 million. And what we're proposing here, inclusive of unavoidable changes only, is about 38.4 million for this year, which equates to a 1.78% tax rate increase. So if you look at the historical pattern of that top table on the screen, you can see that in 19, 20, and 21, in fact, the tax rate went down. We had a slight increase in 2022, and what we're proposing for 2023, again, is an increase. This is, again, only inclusive of unavoidable changes. But if I added that all together and said, what has happened in the last 5 years? Essentially, it would mean that our tax rate has remained the same, which is an important point to point out. And if we move on to the table below, this shows you, and I think CAO Skinner aptly pointed out, how important it is to not only focus on the tax rate, but to focus on what it means to our residents. So in this tax year, on that table below, the median assessed home is at $327,000. So that's an amount that comes to us from MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, and they have said again that they will hold current assessment values of our properties. This is expected until 2024 and possibly 2025, but it makes my job a little easier when it comes to the budget because I don't even need to look at what those phase-in values might be. So for this year, if I look at the very bottom line, the expectation would be with a 1.78% tax rate increase for a median assessed home, that their taxes would increase by about $41.80 per year. I was just looking, I missed my. Sorry, got off track there. So less than $5 a month, $4 a month, I would say, we're in the neighborhood. So not a significant increase, but certainly that is the amount that would be applied. Of course, if you had a home that is assessed at a greater amount, then that value would increase. Next slide, please. So this graph, it's probably one of my favorite things to use because I think it really represents well how we move from a municipal levy back in 2022 to the municipal levy in 2023. Again, we've broken this into two categories. So this is for the unavoidable changes only. If you look on the very first, and I'm going to use my laser pointer and hope I don't hurt anybody's eyes, but if you look at the very first bar graph here, that blue column represents 2022, and all the way to the right, it represents the 2023 amount. The steps in between, or the columns in between, when you see a red bar, it means it negatively impacts the municipal levy, and a green bar positively impacts the municipal levy, meaning it reduces it. What we've tried to do is show you sort of the ups and downs of the items that we've included as unavoidable changes, and I'm going to get into what all of those are and how it impacts the tax rate and the municipal levy itself. These items, so from the very first red bar to the very final red bar, equate to about $1.6 million. So it's quite a change from one to the next, but certainly there are ups and downs in between there. So just to talk through the big items, and I won't go through every single item, but I will highlight the largest items. And this graph is sorted from highest to lowest just because that's the way I like it to look, so that it's really obvious as to what actually happens. But so to start off, the largest increase under the unavoidable changes we have is with respect to salaries and benefits. And this includes step increases, a cost of living at 2%, also any CPP adjustments, EI, OMERS, and medical benefit plans. So any increases that are required as per CPP and EI are included in this amount, as well as our union contracts. So all our union contracted wages, as they work through their contract years, that's included in there as well. And it amounts to about $1.1 million. The bar next to it is 300,000, and that is the total inflationary impact of utilities and fuel. It's largely it's largely energy, where the consumer price index has come back at 15.2% for energy this year, and fuel, for that matter, at 13.3%. So there's a big amount there that is strictly inflationary. There is a small adjustment that's included in there as well, just to bring our transportation division in line with historical actuals. The next column that you see here is for $250,000, and that's the grain terminals continuation. That includes planning work, completing the memorandum of understanding that's currently underway, some legal work and consultants review. And note that we've partially funded this through reserves. So last year, I will rephrase that, we had $300,000 in the budget to go towards the grain terminals revitalization, of which we fully funded that through reserves. And this year, what I'm proposing is that we fund it only at 50%. The next column, it represents the inflationary adjustment for insurance at $133,000. Oh, pardon me. Deputy Mayor?
Just, can I get clarification again on what you just said about the what was in 2022 and what you're doing? So this is the net impact, and how much are you going to have in 2023?
Yeah, so the total cost, correct. The total cost is 500,000, of which 250 is funded through reserves. So what you see here is the net impact to the tax levy. Last year, the net impact to the tax levy was zero because the 300,000 that was allotted in the budget was fully funded through reserves. Does that clarify, Deputy Mayor? So the next we have repairs and, or sorry, I skipped over insurance. Insurance is a big one, something we've been looking at for several years. We've done, or the clerk's office has done a lot of work to try and mitigate the insurance increases that we receive. Right now, we have included it at a 12% increase. Some municipalities have been quoted at a 25% increase. We're hoping we can manage it within this amount, but certainly as we get our quotes updated from our brokers, we'll see how things sort of pan out. I'm going to move you to sort of the green part now, since there's lots of some good news too. We're not all bad news. One of the biggest items is that our policing contract has decreased significantly by almost 300,000 2022 to 2023. And it's largely due to a reduction in the town's allocation for our calls for service. There are two pieces of our OPP billing that make up the entire cost. One is calls for service, which means the number of calls that the town actually has, and then there's what's called the base service. And the calls for service decreased, our portion at least, from 1.468% down to 1.41%, which I know sounds like hardly anything in terms of percentages, but when you're talking about province-wide, it makes a huge difference. Also, the cost for our base services reduced. It was previously $172 per household, and it decreased to $165 a household. So not quite $8 per household as a reduction. Now, mind you, offset a wee bit because, of course, we have a few more households this year, but certainly created a big impact in our budget as well. And finally, and this might seem odd, but the way the OPP billing works is we receive a reconciliation for the year prior in the current year, but it comes off our following year's billing model. So difficult to explain, but largely what I'm trying to say is that we receive a reconciliation from the OPP on an annual basis, which says we've either overpaid or underpaid. And in 2021, it's recording as if we have overpaid. So they provide us a credit in 2023. So that's a big one. The next green bar you'll see is salary contingency, which is a reduction of $150,000. And this is reduced largely because last year we had a salary grid reevaluation, and we weren't sure what the results of that were going to be prior to the budget being presented. So we estimated it to be at $150,000, and obviously we no longer need that this year because the evaluation is complete. Another reduction we have is on the Business Accelerator project, or Business Accelerator program, I should say. This amount wasn't requested for 2023. It might require further council decision, but at this point, we've taken it out of the budget. And finally, as a decrease to the municipal levy, our debentures that are tax supported have gone down by about $100,000 this year. So all of that muddled together essentially means that with respect to the unavoidable changes, there's about $1.6 million worth of change in our municipal levy or in the taxes that we need to raise to bring us to $38.4 million. Again, I want to be very clear that that's only inclusive of the unavoidable changes we've talked about. Next slide, please. So what this graph does is break down, the previous graph told you in dollars how it works from one year's levy to the next. This graph shows us what it means or what it equates to in tax rate impact. And you're going to see on the very left of the graph, that first blue column, where it shows a minus 2.55%, that's representative of the growth that we received this year. And when I refer to growth, what I mean is in the assessment base or the actual homes that have been built. It's not the change in value on an individual's home. So there is no change to the current value assessment, but this is the addition of new homes within the municipality. And what that does is it increases our assessment by 6%. So it helps to offset any increase in the municipal levy as well. So we've included that as part of the unavoidable changes here in terms of the tax rate impact. And when I work myself all the way through all of these items, again, red means bad, green is good. The bottom line is that with unavoidable increases, inclusive of growth, the tax rate impact would be 1.78%. So if we went back a couple of slides and we talked about what does that mean to the individual taxpayer on a median assessed home, it's about $42 a year. Next slide, please. So the other items that the other category of items that I mentioned earlier are the items for consideration. We've included a staff-prepared list that has service enhancements, previous council resolutions, some adjustments to service levels, and these are the items that we feel are within council's control or in discretion. There are implications to removing some of them, for sure, and we'll talk about those as we get through them. But overall, the increase, and again, from the last slide when we talked about the last amount, including unavoidable, to the total that we're going to make our way through here, would be a tax rate increase of 5.31%. What that means is a total tax rate increase, that 5.31, but if I take out the 1.78 of unavoidable changes, these items of consideration amount to 3.53% or about $1.3 million. So that is specific to these items only. And again, we're calling them items for consideration. Next slide, please. So again, this slide presents a summary of sort of what's happened over the last 5 years. The top half of the slide shows you the change in municipal levy. If we included all of the unavoidable changes and these items for consideration, it means that the municipal levy would be a total of $39.7 million, or an increase of just under $3 million. And again, the tax rate increase in total would be 5.31%. Going back to what it means to an individual household, for a median assessed home at $327,000, it's an increase of about $124 a year, which equates to about $10 a month for a taxpayer. Next slide, please. So same type of graph, different information. We talked about all the unavoidable changes, and now we're looking at a walk from the ending of those unavoidable increases or unavoidable changes, I should say, all the way to what, if we included all of the items under consideration or for consideration, up to the final value of $39.7 million. Again, just as the other slides were, red's bad, green's good. And the total value of these items is just over $1.3 million and about 3.5% tax rate increase. So I'm going to walk through these a little bit more carefully. These are the big things that as staff we've, sort of grappled through, I guess that's not the right word, but prioritized and have done quite a bit of work to try and make sure that these are priorities for the organization as well as for our residents. So in the very first red line, you'll see that there is a $314,000 amount, and this is with respect to the asset management plan. We talked a lot about the asset management plan during our council orientation, and thankfully CAO Skinner brought it up quite a bit during her preamble this afternoon. But back in July, we had updated the asset management plan, and I'm going to refer to it as the AMP so that I don't mix up my words. And we revealed that for both the tax-supported assets and the user fee-supported assets, we had a funding gap of about $900,000. So what that means is essentially is what the assets we have said we need to do in order to maintain them and replace them and rehabilitate them over the years versus what we are actually spending or have included in our tax rate is about $900,000 short. So as part of that discussion, or as part of the AMP presentation, staff prepared many different options to start to close that gap, because as we know, this AMP only includes core assets, and we have a great big bunch of assets that are sitting on the side that haven't yet been included, will be included in the first quarter of 2023, and will significantly change that number. But we had put some proposals forward, and one of them was to increase the amount that goes towards the life cycle funding each year within the tax rate. So that's what this $314,000 is representative of. The next column is for $305,000, and it's the urban forestry unit. And as part of a staff report back in August, to address the preservation and augmentation of the local tree canopy, it was recommended that staff present an urban forestry unit for the consideration in the 2023 budget. At this time, what we've included in the budget, or in this request item, is a full-time arborist at about $133,000 a year, a seasonal forestry position at $22,000 a year, and some materials and equipment of $150,000. I'll also note that there are some capital expenditures that are associated with this request as well, and they amount to $450,000. This particular item is at the base very right now, and sort of an overview. Over the next several weeks, we will refine and review it and make sure we have all the elements that are important to be included. The next line we have is the service enhancement positions, and this totals $236,000 and includes the following positions. The first one is a fleet and facilities operator at $115,000. A portion of this is partly offset as they will support the non-tax user base as well. But the net impact will include at this $115,000. And the addition of this position will allow cross-training of the building operators and provide some consistent coverage for town administration buildings, and most notably the environmental service facilities. Prior to 2022, a majority of the building maintenance at Stewart Road was covered by the ES group, or the Environmental Services Group, as a secondary responsibility. And the capacity to do this is very strained and limited at this point. The next position we have is a water distribution operator at $100,000. Again, user fee supported, so there is no tax input, or no tax impact, I should say, and it would be supported through the water and wastewater rates that we currently pay. And this is largely due to new development, system expansions, lots of capital projects on the go, and infrastructure, this very aging infrastructure that requires some maintenance and repairs. The third position included here is a municipal law enforcement officer at $55,000. There is a conversion of 2 seasonal positions in order to support this position. And the hiring of this additional MLEO will provide a much needed relief in the bylaw services division, especially in some key areas, permitting more proactive patrols during schools, in school zones and downtown, and as part of the waterfront. It also supports it will help support the town's crossing guard program throughout the school year. And it provides additional support during the most critical operational periods, and that is between May and October, especially for parking enforcement and things of that nature. The fourth position is a audio-video specialist, or audio-video coordinator, that is slotted at $42,000. And just since the beginning of the pandemic, Clerk Services has supported and managed a hybrid system, also IT services as well, for that matter. And what this really requires is a properly trained and appropriate background to ensure we can continue to hold these meetings successfully. This position is partially offset by savings in overtime as well. It's proposed that this position be combined with the current part-time technology assistant within the library, where staff feel efficiencies can be gained through the sharing of resources and expertise. I'm going to move to the next one, which is studies. So that's at $235,000. And the first one that's included in there is the master transportation plan. The town did complete a transportation update back in 2019, which focused on the evaluation of current and future vehicle traffic on the town's arterial and collector roads. The town also has an active transportation plan from 2019 and a cycling plan in 2019 that looks at modes of transportation other than vehicles. And listening to the concerns raised by many residents and members of the council over the last several years, the designation of our roads and the effect of higher traffic on local and collector roads, it's being proposed that this master transportation plan be updated and included in 2023. A second study that's included in that overall $235,000 is the greenhouse gas reduction pathway feasibility study. The net tax impact of that is $50,000. We have recently applied to a grant program that will cover up to $200,000 of this study. And essentially, the work will help us achieve our climate action plan as we work towards that. And finally, we have two left in there. The strategic plan refresh at $25,000, where we'll get a consultant to help us formulate a corporate strategic plan for 2023 to 2026. And again, the community-based strategic plan that CAO Skinner had mentioned earlier on at $25,000. We're getting through it. Number 5 is the Heritage Review. Again, as part of an April 2022 Development and Operations Services Committee, a council resolution was passed requesting that staff bring forward a comprehensive review of the town's heritage programs, including the committee composition and staff resources for consideration in the 2023 budget. This is set at $100,000. And the proposed amount would be to cover external consultants along with a project manager to provide the requested review. While we think this is an important project, staff do recommend that there's a deferral to 2024 as internal resources would be likely unable to effectively advance this project through 2023 unless other priorities were advanced. And number 6, so we have another asset management plan piece. So this is a second part of the proposed increase to asset management overall. And the other piece was to increase the capital levy. And the capital levy, what makes up the capital levy is the amount of dollars that we raise through taxes to do the big major capital projects. Right now, what we're proposing is that this levy increases by about $98,000. And again, it will just help us in terms of the future and remind everyone that the non-core assets aren't included in that $900,000 gap we talked about earlier. Number 7 is the inclusion of a transit service coordinator at $91,000. In December of 2021, Council received and approved a staff report related to transit service review and optimization study final recommendations. And one of the specific recommendations was that staff include the recommendation to consider one full-time equivalent dedicated to transit in the 2023 budget. With the implementation of a changed transit operating system, the overall transit service would benefit both operationally and financially from a full-time dedicated staff member. The current delivery method is through Public Works, where it's a shared role for the Public Works coordinator and is assigned at 50% of that role. We are recommending that we include some contributions from the neighboring municipalities that participate in our transit program, and that has reduced this amount by about $30,000. And that will be looked at over the next couple months. Number 8 is an amount of $65,000, and it's representative of a council resolution that was brought forward to look at a drone show or an alternative to Canada Day fireworks. We just need to note that there are very few suppliers of this, so this type of display could only be provided if staff can confirm actual availability. But this $65,000 is representative of the cost difference between doing fireworks or doing a drone show. Number 9 is continued support for the UN or UEF Collingwood World Summit and Collingwood's participation as a front-runner town, and equates to $50,000. Number 10 is annual support software, and there's $32,000 included there. And with new software for communications to assist with some social media monitoring and interim website modifications for accessibility and the heritage program. We're getting to the end here. Number 11 is pavement marking reapplication, which amounts to about $27,000. And this proposed level of service would be to increase the number of applications of pavement markings and long lines as requested by council over the past budget processes. And these works would allow for a second application of line painting on Hume, Ontario, Highway 26 East and West, and High Street and Mountain Road. I think we're at the last one. And finally, this is the only green bar that we're showing on here, again, as an item for consideration by council. And it represents the affordable housing amount at a decrease to the municipal tax levy by $225,000. In 2022, as you may be aware, council included a 1% tax rate increase or $350,000 to support the affordable housing program. While the affordable housing master plan is underway, what staff is proposing here is that the amount reduced from $350 in 2022 to $125 in 2023. And once the town actions are prioritized and costed within the master plan, staff would return to council for any additional consideration or funding that may be required. I know the public survey came back as affordable housing as being a very high priority and main issue for the town. I think there's a couple of things that staff took into consideration when we developed this amount. And I'll just walk you through a few of the items that we discussed. One of the items is that the affordable housing master plan is just underway. We are very close to receiving or providing the I can't think of the word, the agreement to the successful proponent. We've had 4 very good bids from very reputable and skilled organizations, which I think staff are thrilled about to receive. But the expectation is that the work won't be completed until June of 2023. So at this point in 2022, we set aside $350,000, and $80,000 of that, or $75,000, goes towards that amount. But that leaves $275,000 in that $350,000 we've set aside in 2020 to do more and better things. We also considered the fact that Bill 23 has come out, and there's been much discussion and concern with respect to how this will impact our DCs, and more specifically with respect to how the units for affordable housing and attainable housing will be completely exempt. And what this could mean is a decrease in what we collect for development charges of about $1 to $2 million per year, which will in fact put a lot of pressure on the municipality to be able to continue to do the work that needs to be done to ensure that we can have the growth that's required. And what that means is that this exemption to development charges will put additional pressure on the existing ratepayers to cover the costs associated with that type of infrastructure, the same ratepayers that are already incorporated in the $350,000 we're talking about. We're also working on, or staff are working on, a rapid accessory dwelling unit program as part of 2022, which will have a cost as well. And in addition to the $125,000 proposed, I think we need to remind everybody that we do have the housing coordinator role that's fully funded in the 2023 budget as well. And finally, before I said finally, but there's one more that I'd like to say is also that if during the year, as the housing master plan comes available and we understand what each of the items that they may recommend are required, we can, or council has the ability to do in-year changes if required. So there's certainly that option as well, but understanding that with the $125,000 plus the $250,000 remaining in 2022, there's a significant amount of money sitting aside there. Next slide, please. So all of that equates essentially to going back to what does it mean to the tax rate, because we know that that is an extremely important part of these presentations. And if we talk about where we ended up with the unavoidable changes at 1.78, and we move our way through all the ups and downs that we just spoke about, it essentially means we will end up at a 5.3% tax rate increase, again, inclusive of all the unavoidable changes and all of the items for consideration. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, I'll go back over this, that each percentage of taxation equates to about $375,000 in taxes collected. So every time we add $375,000 to the municipal levy, it means an additional 1% to the tax rate that's charged back to the residents. We talked about the unavoidable changes and that they amount to about 1.6 million and a tax rate impact of 1.78. Important to remember that that's inclusive of the growth rate at 2.5%. With respect to the items for consideration, that amounted to about 1.3 million and equates to a tax rate impact of about 3.52%, making the total, the change, if we include everything, 5.31. Next slide, please. What I talked about earlier is that staff, as we work through the 2023 budget and understand sort of the changes in operations, one of the things we like to note and remind ourselves of are some of the efficiencies that we've gained throughout the year. I won't go through them all because they are listed in your book, but I'll highlight just a few. The outdoor rink equipment storage building staff were faced with an extreme amount of increase on the tender. Originally, it was budgeted at $350,000, and the tender came back at double that amount. With that information, the facilities people, the recreation facilities people, got together and came up with an alternative approach, which meant that they added some addition to the curling club and did some renovations so that they could store the Zamboni required for the outdoor rink there. So we ended up with sort of two things because of that. We saved $200,000 and we're using a current town facility at a greater capacity, which was really great work. We also had a finance department reorganization. Then throughout 2022, we did the reorganization to ensure that we were focusing on what was important, and of course included many, many business process reviews to come up with a net savings of $173,000 per year. We also incorporated new non-resident parking fees, which helped to offset and are reinvested into our parks and recreation and bylaw departments. And we also have the new Tecumseth administrative fee. Although it won't start till 2026, in the very first year, this will amount to an additional $200,000 and will increase over time as the volume of water changes. And just to highlight, we have a fees and service review in the development for the development process in the planning, building, and engineering division. The grain terminals memorandum of understanding is currently making its way through. And any outstanding financial and other risks related to remediation will be addressed. So that will help us greatly. We purchased a trailer in the wastewater treatment plant instead of renting it. There's some large mitigation happening actually in 2022 for the vandalism that we currently see at the Central Park Arena and Centennial Pool. And it'll mean an additional savings of about $40,000 per year, again, from the recreation facilities people. And finally, we also had additional funding that was found by the fire chief and staff for the pumper truck that we recently ordered and disposed of, and we gained an additional $50,000 in trade-in value on that. Next step, please, or next slide, please. So we're making our way. We're almost there, but this is as an overview just of the total budget and the spending. So the top part of this table shows you the actual expenses that have occurred, or the budgeted expenses, I should say, in total that have occurred from 2015 to 2023. And what we're proposing in 2023 is $133.7 million. The bottom table shows you the change in the municipal levy, or what we actually collect in taxes. So the change from 2015 to 2023, and what we're proposing in 2023 is 39.7 million, again, inclusive of all changes, unavoidable, and the items for consideration. Next slide, please. Okay, last but not least, we're going to move into capital. And certainly this is a big portion of the spending and the activity that happens in the municipality. What's being proposed in the capital budget this year is $66.3 million in expenses. And it's funded by reserves and reserve funds at 26 million, development charges at 21 million. There's some external contributions, and we'll talk more about that in the next slide, at 9.4 million. New debt to be added at 3.6 million, grants at 4.6 million, and taxes at 691,000. So back in the items items of consideration for council to review, we talked about the municipal capital levy that is collected through taxes. This 691,000 is an increase of about 90,000 over the previous year's amount. So that's where that 691 comes into play. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down the spending by division, and you'll see that environmental services covers more than half of the total spending at 37.1 million, pardon me. And this is, of course, inclusive of the water treatment plant. And again, we'll talk more about individual projects in the slides to follow. And this is closely followed by transportation services at nearly 16 million. Next slide, please. So here's a quick glimpse into the major capital projects planned for 2023. Note that many of these projects are completed over multiple years, like the the water treatment plant, Mountain Road widening, the Awin splash pad, and they're currently in progress or have been awarded contracts at this point. So to start, we have the water treatment plant expansion at 15.7 million. Again, this is just part of the beginning process, or the beginning stages of the expansion, and is funded by New Tecumseth at about $9 million, and the remaining through reserves and development charges from the town. We have the sanitary renewal program of 5th Street Oak to Spruce at 5.7 million. Again, this work is currently underway and will continue into 2023. For sanitary treatment, we have digester number 2 repairs. Currently in 2022, this digester is being demolished, and the expectation is to rebuild it in 2023 at $4.5 million. We have the Carmichael Reservoir upgrades at 3.7. Lots of work for environmental services in terms of rehabilitation and repair programs, including the wastewater treatment plant screw pump rehabilitation, some pumping station replacements, and also we have for transportation the Minnesota storm sewer repair at $5 million and Mountain Road widening. From a Parks and Rec standpoint, the Awin water play, or the splash pad, I can't say that very well, is in at 2.3 million. We have a new development park in Summit View at 1.5 million, and then the Wilson Sheffield Park at 1.1 million. Next slide, please. So as part of our lead up today and talking through what the expectation is we've proposed that there's a continuation of public consultation based on this draft. So of course, ongoing information and feedback on the town's Engage page. November 28th, the Coffee with Council, where we'll have the virtual session from 1 to 3 and the in-person session from 6 to 8 at the library. And what the hope is that the second draft will be brought forward at the December 5th SIC meeting. Next slide, please. So with all of this talk that we just had, we did prepare some proposed motions for council consideration. The very first is published in the agenda and basically states that the Strategic Initiatives Committee directs staff to organize the engagement opportunities that we've discussed, most notably the November 28th meeting. And I think I've said that probably 12 times in this presentation, but it's so important. And there are 2 other options. The first is that committee directs staff to create 2 proposed budget scenarios with tax rate increases of council member's choice, either X and Y%, and or that another optional resolution could be prepared, or pardon me, motion could be prepared, that the committee directs staff to include certain items off the list of items for consideration, or any other items that that council sees fit. And next slide, please. And that, one more, that will be it. So now we can open it up to questions and discussion.
Well, thank you very much for that thorough presentation. You make it very understandable. Or maybe I'm just getting better at hearing what you're saying. I'm not sure, one or the other. So what we'll do at this stage is we're going to see if there's any people in our gallery who would like to ask questions or make a presentation at this time. So I'll just start with our in-person gallery. Would there be anyone who would like to address council? I'm seeing none. Clerk Almas, would there be anyone in our virtual waiting room?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. We do have an attendee. They've actually must know the process. They've raised their hand. It looks like David Orling would like to address the standing committee regarding the budget today.
Thank you. Dr. Orling, go ahead.
Mike should be unmuted now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. And Clerk Almas, thank you very much. I submitted some comments and yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Of the audio. So we'll just do a couple tests here, maybe.
Try now.
Dr. Orling, try speaking now.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much. We haven't heard anything you might have said, so if you have said anything, would you please start over?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. And thank you, Clerk Almas, for receiving and distributing the notes that I had sent in earlier. I wasn't sure that I would be able to make the meeting, but I really appreciate this opportunity. So I won't read directly from that, but basically, on behalf of CCAT, I would like to point out that it has been highlighted in the introduction to the budget, and it's well recognized that we have high inflation right now in an ongoing pandemic. But we also want to make sure that we reinforce that we do have a housing and affordability crisis for many, and we do have an ongoing climate crisis that must be kept in mind. And we appreciate that we have a new council that has been put to task to take on this challenge at the present time. We appreciate your efforts in doing so. And also the work that the town staff has done to try and balance all of these priorities along with the financial difficulties that you're facing. We tried to have a look at the draft budget and view it with a climate lens, and we encourage council to also do the same. There are many lenses that can be applied to these types of things, but keeping in the back of the mind that we do have these other issues to address, I think is very important and helpful. And remembering that we have not only short-term issues to address, but longer-term ones as well is very important. One of the things that we wanted to point out was that there are many references to inflationary increases in costs in the draft budget, related primarily to the energy use and insurance. And also the term fossil gas, natural gas is used frequently in the reports. And it's well known that what we would like to refer to as fossil gas prices are projected to climb fairly substantially in 2023, which could affect the budget as well. I think it's important to recognize that some of the inflationary costs pertaining to insurance can be attributed to the cost of climate change, and that's well recognized. And that carbon pricing and substantial increase in costs of fossil fuels will also make a stronger case for us to look at shifting our energy use to more efficient uses of energy, but also electrification from clean, reliable sources. We would encourage the draft budget going forward to replace the term natural gas with fossil gas, because we think it more accurately reflects the reality that climate change is an issue and that fossil fuels are a significant part of that. We're very encouraged that consideration has been given to the planning studies on transportation and greenhouse gases, and we hope that these will be undertaken, and we hope that they will lead to some significant action. We think it's important that we move towards shifting our priority to moving people safely as opposed to vehicles, and the transportation study could help in that regard to come up with some strategies to do so. We would also like to see the greenhouse gas emissions factored into the corporate and community climate action plans, recognizing that moving in a forward direction in these respects as well will have co-benefits of cleaner air, water, and a healthier population for our community. Improvements in transit services, which are very important, not only for efficiency reasons, but also as a matter of social equity, and urban forestry resources would also improve our community and help us both mitigate and adapt to climate change. There are immediate needs that have to be met for people, in particular housing, if they're to address longer term needs. And those priorities obviously will stay at the forefront. The recent UN Collingwood World Summit conference envisioned what affordable, sustainable housing that's designed and built with a climate lens in mind could look like, and our hope that is some of those ideas could be developed and brought to fruition as well. The final comment that I would like to make pertains to natural assets. And those are elements around us that provide us with environmental services such as clean air, water, and climate resilience. And we generally take these for granted. People will also refer to this as green infrastructure. And we tend to not account for these adequately, nor put them on the books. And many municipalities are moving in that direction. And it is recognized in many cases that green infrastructure can provide some of these services at lower cost than what so-called man-made or gray infrastructure. And certainly, as many municipalities are starting to assign valuations to the natural assets, things such as the Silver Creek wetlands or urban canopy and naturalized spaces could be envisioned. We'd like to see Collingwood to consider doing so in the future as well. I think that's all I have to say for the present time. Like I say, some written comments were submitted, and I appreciate this opportunity very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts on this. Clerk Almas, would there be anyone else?
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. We do have another individual that is actually a panelist. They have not identified themselves. They're still named Town of Collingwood. They do have their hand up, and I don't know if that is an error. It appears that was an error. There is no further attendees wishing to address the standing committee at this time.
All right, thank you. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is turn it over to our standing committee for questions, clarifications, comments, directions, and as you know, any motions that you wish to bring forward concerning the budget now can be voted on, and they can be reversed without the typical 2/3 requirement because it's budget. And once we've completed that discussion, then we're going to look at the three-prong motion that staff has put before us for consideration. And perhaps our discussions and questions will help inform what we might want to do with that suggested motion. So, over to the committee. Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. So, this has become such a terrific document for us to read through and to really make our questions a little easier, or maybe stand out a little more, or maybe refine them a bit better. But so I guess I'll just start with the note on page 8 of 214, the $15,000 increase proposed for the special capital levy. I think that has typically been expressed as, I think it was 2.25%. I can't remember what it had gotten up.
It was, pardon me, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Jeffrey.
Mayor to the Treasurer.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask you again to refer to what page number?
Page 8 of 214.
Thank you. Through you to the Treasurer, thank you.
Sorry. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. So it was previously at 0.75%.
Oh, I thought it had gone up.
So then it comes up to, I believe it's 1.1% with the proposed increase.
And through you again, Mayor Hamlin, have we calculated that per household? Because that's going to go on top, no matter what percentage rate. It would be going on top of the 124.76 or on top of the whatever we land on.
You're right. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. To be honest, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I believe it would be in the neighborhood of about like two something on an average home. But I'll definitely get back to you. I should have that number.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And then on page 11, the business accelerator, I just written myself a little note as unavoidable, but really is it staff's recommendation. I think we've invested 2 years already into this. It's been an extremely successful program. And I wanted to clarify, is this actually staff's recommendation? I think I read somewhere that there was no request for future funding. So if that's the case, but I just wanted to make sure because I know what an impact it's been able to make, given that it's also a regional initiative.
Through you,
If I may,
thank
through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. I'm going to call on Director Valentine. I believe she's online, but I do believe that there has not been a request specifically for it to continue. Or Manager Kenny might be even better. Oh, I see her now.
Hi, thank you, Director Valentine. Could you answer this question, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to echo the Treasurer's comments that we do have Manager Kenny online that can provide a more fulsome response to this particular question and some background for the new council on the accelerator, what has previously been approved and the plans for the future.
Thank you very much. So the business accelerator so far, the council has provided $300,000 for the initiative. There was no request this year. And essentially what happens is they require lead time to spend the money that we've provided them. So you will see an update in 2023 after their fiscal year ends on March 31st. They'll go through an audit and then there'll be a report similar to the way there was for the holdovers from last council, the same sort of presentation that happened. So we don't anticipate needing further funds in this budget cycle, but there may be a request at some point towards the 2024 budget.
Reductions, but I think they also took the opportunity to use it to offset their decisions to get to the 1.78 or 2%. Is that correct? So nothing was left in terms of those efficiencies for council to use to offset against the additional considerations to be added on. Is that a correct assessment?
Go ahead, Treasurer
If I may,
Quinlan.
through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. Yes, that's correct. They are things that are already in place and working that we've done throughout 2022. So you're in fact correct.
I loved the list. It was great, and I hope we get lots more. One thing that wasn't noted under here is unavoidable that will have an impact on 2023 was a delegated authority decision believed to add a planning position during the previous council. So that impact isn't in here, but it was made and it will impact. Do we have the amount approximately?
If I may,
Through
through
you.
Your
Yeah.
Worship, to
Go,
Councillor
please
Jeffrey,
do.
it is included in the overall salaries and benefits. I did not highlight that, but you're right. I believe it was 80,000, but I'd have to confirm that number.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So for number 1 on that list and number 3, no, sorry. Number 1 and number 6, those are just, one is an operating amp difference and the other is a capital amp difference.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah, okay. All right. I already kind of know my answers on some of these. For the municipal law enforcement officer on page 13, 3C, I think you referred that that's a net difference. I'm assuming that the impact to 2024 will be more than the 55,000 if we've already have kind of like a one-time credit of 2 positions we're taking in on this. So to understand that, what is the impact in the 2024 budget that we would be working on if we approved that?
I suspect it would be closer to the $90,000 range because the 2 seasonal positions are probably about $20,000 each. One thing I should mention about that, and as we look at that position further, one thing that Clerk Almus has brought up is that, in fact, we could offset a portion of that amount in the tax levy by funding it partially through parking, because, of course, it will have parking responsibilities. So in the next draft, that's something we would like to bring forward.
Okay, thank you. And if I might, Mayor Hammond?
Yes, go ahead.
The audio video person, my question here was, have wages been reduced to reflect the offset? So in other words, if there was part-time, and again, I think you referred to net, if there was overtime occurring, did we reduce the wages by the overtime?
The 42,000 does not include the reduction, but the overall salaries and benefits line does include that net amount.
Okay, thank you. So I was curious as to page 14, this study's the very first one, master transportation plan, that staff would pull that out, and is it a staff recommendation by putting it here that they feel that it can be delayed? I'm just wondering about the link between it and the OP and the things that we're doing. I found it a strange place to find it, that staff would move it into a council decision, and I'd like to better understand how it fits into our other processes.
Please go ahead.
If I may, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey, I'm actually going to call on Director Slama, who probably has a really great answer to that. So I'll let her speak.
Director Slama, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So we brought it forward as it wasn't in the plan to move forward with a study in 23. It was previously scheduled for 24. Okay. So that's why we wanted to bring it forward and highlight it as a change.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and the strategic plan refresh, well, I appreciate the opportunity to add the community-based strategic plan. I think it should have been there. I'm not really sure why we'd be deciding that with a new council. I think it was an absolute should have been in, unavoidable, because it's an election year. You have a new council coming. I find it strange that we'd be voting on that, but that's our right to do it. What would be the fallout of a delay of a transit service coordinator? Our transition's been really delayed in terms of going to the on-demand service, and that would be through you, Mayor Hamlin, I think, to Director Slama again.
Yes, go ahead, Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So, right now we have one position that is doing, some work coordinating public works, primarily operational services, and then also doing some work on the transit side. So with this new contract, there just isn't the ability to have that focus on transit. So we feel, and following through with the recommendation of the optimization study that we did have completed, we've brought this forward, for council's consideration to have someone then who can be focused on transit, focused on the delivery of the services that we're looking to implement in the short and the longer term. Gives a greater ability to look at some of the things that we've heard, at least from the previous council, like the electrification, and also working with our partners that we are providing some, service for, right? So what is our ability to do that better or potentially even expand it? Just different opportunities, I think, really to, instead of just providing that transit service, but really enhancing it.
Thank you. And if a follow-up, Director Slama, would, if we went back and reanalyzed the information we had when we made the decision in terms of more affordable, more flexible easily to go back to the way it was, analysis for council to make that decision. Would this extra money change that analysis at all in terms of the decision we made to go to the different system?
Go ahead, Director Salama.
Thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. So through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So if I understand you correctly, are you asking, is this position dependent on the implementation of on-demand service?
No. Okay. Sorry to confuse you. What I'm asking is, would we have anticipated this cost? Is this changing the financial analysis that we would have made in our willingness to change from the service the way it is now to the on-demand service? Was this built in, or should we have anticipated this ask coming?
So through Madam Chair to Councillor Jeffrey, I'd have to look at the study and see, certainly because the study did make the recommendation for a dedicated staff member. I believe that it was part of that, financial considerations when you look at the service, but I would need to verify that.
Okay, thank you. And I know our Affordable Housing Task Force has made a plea to maintain the amount at the 1% motion the previous council had made. And I really appreciate and understand staff bringing forward the points that they have. And also recognizing, I think, that part of the town's contribution to affordable housing may be through the donation of land assets, that given where we're at in terms of the process, I'm kind of a maybe at number 12 right now. So, but I do appreciate both sides of that argument. And so the other questions I had... I'm just a little worried about when we say median assessed, how many homes will we have to sit here and calculate that are probably double that within the assessment? Is there a way of knowing how we're impacting households? And through the mayor, my comment would be is that I know that we are facing inflation, but the households that we represent and look after are facing inflation in all parts of their lives. We haven't even seen the Simcoe County's increase, and I know that budget proposal started out, I believe, the county reps will tell me if different, is around 3.5%. And without understanding the impact of what can come from the county and the other parts, I almost worry that we're superseding that information and making our decision. And we already have young families who own homes who are maybe picking between paying utilities and buying food. So I don't think a brave council would be one that says, yeah, we're going to go for that 5%. We're going to be brave of that public opinion on doing such a thing. I think the brave thing would be to really assess what it is we can cut out or not do or delay in terms of our budget discussion. So I'm looking forward to hearing all of those. And I know that I believe through Mayor Hamlin, the Treasurer's very confident with the reasonableness and accuracy of the supplemental tax income. I believe that that's come to a place that's better to understand. The question I always ask with capital through the mayor again is, even though it's only 691,000, still about 2% and a bit, are these projects, I know they're even put in part, but is it reasonable that we can expect to finish those? I know every given year we have, for whatever reason, we're not able to finish projects, but the taxpayers have already paid into that. So wherever we can ease that off with reasonableness, I think I would appreciate it. And then I know many councils that I've been on have talked about the prudence of reducing our debt. But is there some thought, or I don't know how to word it, about taking on debt, that the impact of what we're trying to do for long-term gain is spread over the long term? And is there a place for that in this budget? And I think that's my question so far. Thank you.
Is that a rhetorical question, that last one, or would you
No.
like the treasurer? Okay.
I would like the treasurer to answer that. I saw her nod.
Oh, okay.
Why I'm braving it.
I may through you,
Go
Your
ahead.
Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. So certainly debt with respect to items that last, several years. The question always becomes who should pay for the new asset. Is it the people using it today or the people that are going to be using it tomorrow? But certainly we've assessed that. And one of the items that we've included that has some debt funding is the Minnesota storm repair. I think as we build out the asset management plan and we add the non-core assets, that there's going to be a lot more pressure on how much debt we take on. So what I'm trying to do right now as we balance sort of the 2023 budget pressures, and then I can think of the number that, will come out once the full asset management plan is in place and balance that as well, and then come up with a full-on long-term strategic sort of debt plan. That's when I think we incorporate more of a thought towards it, but certainly looked at it for this budget. And when I talk about debt, I don't always mean that we're going to go outside and borrow the cash either. As a municipality, we've done quite well and been able to save quite a bit, a healthy investment strategy. We can borrow from ourselves as well. So there's different options and more ways to skin a cat, I guess, than just one. But I hear what you're saying, and I agree that there needs to be some thought towards, this asset will be in place for 35 years. Does it make sense that then, you're looking at a debenture for 35 years or 25 or whatever makes sense?
Thank you.
Would anyone else have questions? Yes, Councillor Potts.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I did have a question on number 7 on page 15, but Councillor Jeffries' question did clarify kind of what I was wondering about. But in regards to page 13, and it would be question number 2 for the arborist, I guess a full-time arborist, seasonal forestry position and materials and equipment. Just looking at this and kind of in the past understanding that, we've always kind of had these kind of things in place. What is it that, we're looking, to look at an additional crew? Do we have internal resources now that we could maybe potentially, eliminate this cost and utilize what we do have in place? So that's just kind of the only question I really have. So to the treasurer, potentially through your worship to Director Slama, I'm not sure.
Oh, Director Slama, would this be a question for you? Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Potts. So previously we did, on the public works side, have a position within the union that had the ability, was arborist and had the ability to do that work. During our last round of negotiations, there was an interest to remove that. And so at this time, whereas we may have some people on the crew that have those skills and abilities, we're in a bit of a limbo situation of using some members of that crew to do the work. So with this position and looking at these opportunities on the park side, I think Director Culver can speak to it, but the intention is to look at having these skills be internal positions. Correct. That's correct. He's nodding that is correct. And so there is. It would just be under the parks department instead of within the public works department. And yeah, so I think hopefully that answers your question.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. That'll be everything for me.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize if these questions are going to be a little bit stream of and the first one, you may have already answered this, but just to clarify, there's a number of projects that we started or planned to start in 2022 and even 2021. So are the budget items that we're seeing for this budget net of whatever we've spent on those projects so far? Or are we taking what we allocated from previous years?
Through you, Your
Yeah,
Worship,
go
to
ahead.
Councillor Doherty. So I think what you're referencing is specific capital projects, and maybe I'll use an example so that it provides sort of the information you're looking for. So I'll use the splash pad, for example.
That's what I'm thinking
Okay.
of, actually.
So with reference to the splash pad, what we have budgeted for this year is what actually the work that will be completed in 2023. Any works that was done previously would have gone through the levy or reserves or however it was funded in the previous year. So let's say, for example, and I'm going to look at Director Culver a little bit, but that the design work was completed in 2021 or 2022 for Awin, and it cost us $350,000. That's not included in the budget that we're showing you. It's showing you the true expenditure that will happen in 2023. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah. So are there any little happy little surprises that we will see from works, and again, it'd probably be primarily capital works, that were not completed in 2022, that we can move that allocated budget into 2023 and help to reduce the number of dollars that we have to raise from taxes?
If I may, Your Worship,
Yes, go
through you
ahead.
to Councillor Doherty. It's a great question. I think so, but it's going to get a little bit convoluted. But if we talk about the actual capital levy, the amount of taxes we raise to go towards our taxes, it's very small. On a $66 million expenditure, we have $700,000 set aside, just under $700,000 that we're raising through taxes. Everything else comes through reserves. So great question, because, for example, there are projects that we're carrying forward that we budgeted in 2022, and we'll go back to the splash pad just because it's an easy one. We budgeted for the splash pad in 2022, but it's completely funded between, well, I think actually in total by development charges. There might be a small reserve fund in there as well. But essentially, it was no tax impact, and that carries on into 2023. There is no tax impact. So when we carry it forward, and it's a net zero game in the sense of how it impacts the levy, there's really no happy little surprise that we might get in that sense. Certainly, any of the surpluses that we receive at the end of 2022, and you're going to see the third quarter projection quite soon in early December. And I don't want to throw out numbers because I haven't completely done my analysis. But if there were any surplus funds that were included in the 2022 budget, even if they were for capital, and if I used a specific program, we would assign that to that capital plan. So it's not, let's say for the splash pad, I'm going to go back to the splash pad, and let's say in the capital levy that $150,000 was supported through tax. If they didn't spend, or if the Parks Department didn't spend the $150,000 in 2022, I would set that aside in its own reserve or its own pocket, and that $150,000 would be carried forward into 2023 and reduce the impact of that project. So specifically for capital projects especially, any amount we raise in capital levy, it's solid and done. There's no moving it unless, we bring something forward to council and say, we don't need this, we'd like to move it elsewhere, and it gets moved on to the next budget. Unfortunately, our capital levy portion is very, very small. Again, $66 million in expenses, we've only got about $700,000 included in the tax rate that raises that. That makes sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Carry on. So there's, and again, these questions primarily relate to the items for consideration. Okay. But there are a number of items that I can see here might be ideal candidates for grant or even low interest loan funding from primarily federal government, and I'm thinking of the Green Municipal Fund, and that could potentially offset our startup costs for our urban forestry unit, as an example, our transit coordinator, as an example. So has this been considered or looked into, or do we have any indication?
I may, through
Go
you, Your
ahead.
Worship, to Councillor Doherty. We have looked at the Green Municipal Fund quite a bit. In fact, one of the sources of funding we're hoping for the water treatment plant is possibly that fund. That being said, that fund isn't really a grant program. It's more of a loan program, not forgivable in most parts. We have looked at it at other FCM grants. There are a few others with respect to green funding as well. But what we're finding that is extremely difficult to meet is the GHG reduction that they are requesting and the time frame that they allow. So, for example, one of the projects that we completed last year in the Eddie Bush Arena was an aerator system. Don't ask me what it does exactly, but it does save on GHG. And the amount it saved was, I think, in the range of 10 to 15%. But in order to achieve or to meet the goal of that actual grant funding, it had to be between 25 and 35%. We worked heavily with our fleet or with our facilities people to try and understand what would we need to do to actually meet that goal. And it essentially would equate to putting solar panels on the roof of the Eddie Bush Arena in order to get that grant, in order to achieve the goal that they had allowed. What makes it difficult is it doesn't allow us to go back in time. Our fleet and our facilities people and the rec facilities people especially are very, very passionate about trying to reduce A, the costs, and B, their climate impact as well. So we've made changes over several years, say over the last 5 years, that significantly impact our net carbon imprint, or I'm sorry, I'm not using the right words, but it have significantly reduced our GHGs for sure. But they only allow from the beginning of the project to the end of the project, of course, which makes sense. I totally can understand that, but it's very difficult for us to achieve.
That's interesting. Perhaps our council rep on FCM could feedback on Green Municipal Fund and that assessment just from our own experience. Next question, and again, going back to the urban forestry unit or the transit coordinator, are these applications, by that I mean business applications, that could be supported or partially supported if we were to provide those services to our surrounding municipalities? Like maybe if we were to fund an urban forestry unit, that we may be able to contract them out to Town of the Blue Mountains or Clearview, as an example.
I may, through you,
Yes.
Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty. Certainly a great question, and something that the CEO Skinner has brought up and as will form part of the review and refinement of that particular unit. With respect to the transit coordinator, the $91,000 impact actually includes a contribution, albeit it's not an agreement yet, from our surrounding municipalities that take part in the transit system, like the Town of Blue Mountains and Wasaga Beach as well.
Thank you. And just one more question with regard to transit. The transit on demand models that we have had available to us have illustrated that it has increased ridership, so therefore revenue, and has also reduced cost of operation. So has that been worked into these calculations for 2023?
Go
If I may,
ahead.
through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty. I'm going to call on Director Slama again. I will say that the updated contract, in fact, increases the expenses in terms of accessibility. So there is an increase in the cost required to maintain the transit system. From a revenue side, we have looked at what actual historical and provided sort of a forecast of what we expect the increase to be. But I'll look to Director Slama to help me with that answer.
Go ahead, Director Slama.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Doherty. I think Treasurer Quinlan spoke correctly. The expenses reflect the current operational contract, and we have incorporated some anticipated hopeful increases in the revenue, but hard to know until we operate that program.
Thank you. And then just one other question, and this is just sort of in general relating to capital and particularly vehicles. It seems that we most of the time purchase our vehicles new. What have we explored the notion of purchasing our vehicles used, or even like gently used?
Go ahead.
If I may, Your Worship,
Yes.
through you to Councillor Doherty. I certainly couldn't answer that overall. I'm gonna look to Director Pegg as well, but I would say that one of the things that our fleet program does is use the trucks or vehicles, any type of vehicle, till they're on their very last legs, and we can at least receive some money when we take them to auction. So, for example, if there was a particular vehicle that was purchased brand new in a year, we may keep that vehicle for nearly 12 to 15 years, but it may get passed down throughout the organization so that, for example, our students aren't driving a brand new F-150 or whatever it might be. But certainly I'm not sure 100% if we do look at used programs, and I'd look to Director Pegg to help me answer that question.
Go ahead, Director Pegg.
Thank you.
Executive Director Pegg, yeah.
No? Okay, great. Counselor, so I was actually going to touch on some of the comments that Treasurer Quinlan noted in the notion that we have vehicles new that come in, and we make sure that we get a good use out of those while we have them. I will have to ask our fleet and facilities manager, Dave McNulty, to comment on our current consideration of used vehicles. But from what I understand, we usually have custom builds for our purposes, and when we go out to tender, include those specific needs. But I will certainly take it back to him as a consideration when we're looking at the budget. But usually we do have very specific needs for our vehicles.
Great, thank you. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Houston.
Through you, Mayor, to the Treasurer. You had mentioned that the transit service coordinator position was inclusive of any offsets from other municipalities. What's the impact that we would be looking at if we didn't receive those offsets?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Houston, it's about 120,000.
Additional or?
Nope, in
Okay.
total. So 30,000 additional.
Thanks. Councillor Baines, I know you've been sitting there patiently on our Zoom feed. I didn't want to miss you. Did you have any questions at this time?
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. To Treasurer Quinlan, this is perhaps from a not skilled in accounting question, but this is about the 900,000 funding gap. And as I recall from your slide that was items for consideration, impacts on municipal tax levy, the red one on the left was 314,000 for the AMP funding gap. Do I assume that A, the total gap is 900,000 at this point, and that B, by paying this 314 in this budget, it would buy it down to about 600,000, and that furthermore that the AMP capital levy increase of 96,000 would buy it down even more at the end of fiscal 23 to about 500,000. Am I correct in that?
Go ahead.
I may, Your Worship, through you
Treasurer.
to Councillor Baines. You're absolutely correct. As we start to build up both the capital levy and then the transfer to reserves that we've included, that slowly reduces the $900,000 gap.
Just as a comment, I'm very much in favor of this. I used to be on the board of directors of one of the ski clubs, and we all talked to the other ski clubs, and a number of them were in big trouble a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, because they did not have adequate capital reserve funds, and we started it and everybody followed us. So I'm a big proponent of this. Just one further comment about a potential efficiency. This is what I see to be an overlap between the OPP and our fire department. When I sat on the police services board, I was pleased to hear about their marine unit, and I think they have 2 boats. And I assume we don't pay for that directly because of our annual stipend to the OPP. But I also understand that our fire department have a marine unit, or at least a boat as well. And I would just ask rhetorically, is it the best and wisest use of our funds, even though we're not necessarily paying it directly to the OPP, to be operating 2 marine units, 2 boats?
Okay,
and I'm not
thank
sure
you
who I
for
would direct that to.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm going to bring up Chief Thurman here to help me answer that question.
Hi, Chief Thurman. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. We do both have boats. We're more for rescue, and the police are more for enforcement. So that's pretty much the easiest way to say it. So they'll go out and ticket people speeding, all those type of infractions. And we're strictly this for rescue.
Okay. Question asked, question answered. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. That's it? Okay. Anyone else have questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. I do have a couple questions regarding the terminals, Summit View Park and Wilson Sheffield Park. There are probably a couple other that I may have missed, but is there any way to recoup some of that money through the developers once the parks are completed? I was under the assumption parks are looked after by developers, whether it's the land or whatever is put in the parks. And as far as the terminals go, once they are developed, is there any way to recoup that money through the company that does do the developing of that site?
Okay, go ahead, Treasurer.
I may, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Perry. And I'll bring in the respective Executive Director Peg and Director Culver at some point too. I'll start with the Summit View Park. Mm-hmm. That will be fully development charge recoverable, so it isn't included in the levy itself, and is fully covered by development costs. On the terminals, well, actually, I'm going to leave that to last because that's a little bit more complicated. On the Wilson Sheffield Park, to be honest, I'm drawing a blank here as to how we funded that. So I'm going to ask Director Culver if that's a new park. It is development charges as well. So those two are completely covered by development charges. So when it comes to the terminals, and I'll let Executive Director Peg hop on this as soon as I'll just give you a brief overview. The $500,000 or the net $250 that's included in the budget for next year is more about the planning aspects, getting the memorandum of understanding completed, legal works, and any other kind of consultant work we might need to get the appropriate MOU together. Right. But with respect to the projects that go along with the terminals, there is a large list of items that are included in the development charge study, up to about $15 million, that would be fully development charge recoverable. With exception to, and one thing that I think is really important is that you may note that on our financial statements, there's an $8 million remediation liability that's listed in our statements to remediate the grain terminals themselves. And I don't know how much I can actually share, but we are, as part of the MOU, there may be some consideration that's involves that as well. But honestly, the largest projects or the big projects that would go around the terminals and be included in the terminals would certainly be development charge recoverable. So I'll look at Executive Director Peg to see if she has anything to add to that.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Treasurer Quinlan, for the introduction on the project. In terms of the funding for the works that will take place on the spit, we're in the process right now of negotiating with Streetcar and Dream for the development of the Memorandum of Understanding. It's our intention to bring that forward to Council for consideration this year, and we've actually provided Streetcar with a first draft that they're reviewing right now and are planning on meeting with them actually tomorrow to hear back their comments. So that's well on its way. In terms of the project itself and the 500,000, I'm wondering, with the mayor's permission, if I could talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today and the resources that have gone into that, or the time and effort that have gone into that, to help put a fine point on why the $500,000 is important. Because to understand why the budget ask, I think it's important to have some of the context of how we got to where we are today. I promise not to take too much time, but I do think for the benefit of new councillors, it might be worthwhile.
Yes, please go ahead. I think it'd be great to have an update on that.
Okay, thank you so much. So in 2018, an engineering assessment was completed by Tacoma Engineering, and that was to inform the abatement and remediation requirements and identify existing health and safety related conditions for the terminals. The report estimated, as Treasurer Quinlan had touched on, an $8 to $10 million to maintain the facility in its current use, and $5 to $6 million for demolition. So at that time, it resulted in $8 million unfunded liability. And please note, this is not current day value, so that may change based on construction costs for today. A white paper on the Collingwood grain terminals outlining available options was presented to Council by CAO Skinner and Director Culver in 2019, and direction was given at that time for next steps. In addition, we've completed a built heritage assessment, other background investigations, and geotechnical work has taken place. We've secured a process advisor through an open recruitment. We've gone out to an open and transparent RFPQ and subsequently an RFP, which landed on the selection of a highest ranked proponent, which was Streetcar and Dream. In August of 2022, the former council endorsed that we proceed to negotiate with Streetcar and Dream. So we're actively working with them right now, and the process advisor and legal and numerous town subject matter experts in the preparation of that memorandum of understanding, which will become the basis for future agreements, development agreements, et cetera, with the developer. And that's where we would get into, who's funding what and what's the total cost of the town. The terminals project not only addresses, the future of the facility, but also opportunities for accelerated development around the waterfront, so the spit specifically, and opens, a lot of opportunities for public realm enhancements. And we're excited to, share those with council and also get community input on what those may be as we move forward in the process. So the $500,000 budget ask, as Treasurer Quinlan had noted, is $250,000 on the levy and $250,000 in reserves. And that's to ensure that the revitalization project has adequate resourcing to continue to push forward. So similar to how we've, reached milestone steps over the past several years, our intention is to continue to meet milestones going forward. And then, of course, pending council approval of an MOU, Streetcar and Dream in the town would be working to further develop the design that they've put forward and begin with extensive public engagement on that design. Planning applications would be submitted, et cetera. So there's quite a robust process that would be outlined in that MOU for council consideration. So the $500,000 would go towards planning expertise, so to provide concentrated project support and project advice. So recognizing the significant size of this project and the current pressures and workload within our planning division, which I know this council has heard from Director Valentine and our CAO on.
So it would ensure we have that concentrated support, project advisor support. So currently we have KPMG supporting the project. It would help fund public and stakeholder engagement initiatives that were outside of the, terminals proper, but within the SPIT or public realm areas. It would help support legal fees, so making sure that our development agreements and any other agreements had, robust legal reviews by Miller Thompson is who we're using. And any studies that may be required that fall under the town's responsibility for public realm enhancements. So could be sustainable development opportunities, verification of existing site parameters, among other studies that we may deem appropriate. And also to help support minimum maintenance of the grain terminals that may be required for health and safety reasons, while the final vision is solidified through negotiations and public input. So I think that gets us to where we are today and why that $500,000 is so important to help move us forward. But certainly looking to council's input on the appropriateness of the amount. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Perry, do you have any further questions?
Oh, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
We've been sitting for 2 hours, so I'm going to suggest we take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back. Thank you. Okay, thank you, council and staff. We'll now reconvene our meeting. I'll ask one last time before I ask my questions. Are there any other council questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor Fryer.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hamlin. And I'm going to ask through you to the treasurer. But I'm going to make an initial statement first, and I'm going to try to get in the habit of having the microphone stuck right up to me. I know it might look a little bit weird on camera, but I know in watching in the past, over the last few years, sometimes inadvertently it just takes a little turn of the head, and it's hard to pick up the words. So I'm going to practice what I preached to the television when I was watching back then. So I'm going to start out as we get into this formal 2023 budget process. I want to say that I found that staff have provided a great deal of very useful information. I appreciate the efforts to date, including the preliminary status reports provided to the previous council. Also during council school a couple of weeks ago. Admittedly, based on some of our discussions at orientation, I hadn't expected some of what I now see, but I may have missed something, and so we'll ask questions to try to help me through this. And admittedly, I'll even say I had trouble getting through. I understand what Councillor Jeffrey has mentioned about how it's come a long way, but it's still even tough for me to get through and totally understand everything. And I appreciate the clarifications you've provided and wanted to listen to questions and such. I think we're in a very difficult situation, this council, even with just the unavoidable list of impacts or list of items that the impact shows. I'm going to continue to be upfront about my concern about Collingwood's tax level. It's not just mine, but it's the focus of the comments I've received. So trying to figure out how to help to minimize the needs and not take away all the wants. We've talked, CAO Skinner and Councillor Jeffrey both talked about the taxpayer, and the other elements of it are just as Councillor Jeffrey said, it's not just the municipal taxes, it's the county taxes, and it is 3.5 at this point in time. And then what's the water impact? Because it's not just about the tax rate, it's the other question the taxpayer asks is why and how it's being spent, because that's really the key to the whole thing, because that your spending is what's going to drive everything. So I would think that one good thing is that since we have started at such an early date, I believe that helps us to have a reasonable amount of time to work and work this out for a reasonable date. I do recognize staff's direction that early 2023 is tendering in 2023 early is preferred for very good reasons. To that I will say I'm still trying to wade through it all, and there are particular capital budget items that if there are particular capital budget items that need to be brought forward for immediate consideration, say some sort of type of pre-budget approval. We've done that in the past with fire trucks and things like that. I'm all in for that being done. But to be clear, though, I'm not saying that I'm in to allow unfinanced expenditures, because I continue to not support that. I'm going to circle back on UEs later, but I have some initial questions, and then maybe from that I can they can be covered immediately, and then I think some of them might take a little bit. But so I'll just ask before I start, the year-to-date that's shown, is that September?
If I may, through you, Your Worship, to or Deputy Mayor Fryer. At this point, it's part of October, so it would be up to mid-October.
So it's kind of to date of what the time you take that format off.
It's a snapshot, and it's live, yes.
It may be useful to, like I was trying to see, it's not really that beneficial to try to do any kind of comparative because you're not providing the same kind of look for 21 and 20. So it's just a suggestion for future consideration. And then the year-to-date, or sorry, that was the year-to-date. So the year-end forecast, when would we expect to see that? So we'd have an idea of how 2021's finishing out. I know that there's forecast here from a budget standpoint, and of course, just as we said, up to October. Do you have any idea on when you can provide us with the year-to-date forecast?
If I may, through you,
I said year-to-date again. You know, I mean,
I know what you mean.
year-end. Yeah.
If I may, through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Fryer. So the year-end forecast will be provided at the December 5th SIC meeting. So there will be an amount, but I do think your comments are good, and it's something that we should consider, that on a go-forward basis, that really the year-end forecasted number would be included as a comparative amount. I won't promise that will be for the second draft, because there's lots of work to get to the second draft, but certainly something we should be looking at in the future.
Okay, thank you. So in regards to just getting some clarification about the unavoidable 1.78 chart, you've talked about the $300,000 OPP decrease. I was trying to look back at the page 21, the operation budget by division. And again, as I said, I'm new to this again, and I'm trying to look back at numbers. I like to see numbers that match and go back and forth. So I'm going to ask for some clarification on those, because the police line is identifying $5,083,174 as the budget amount for 2023. And the 2022 budget was $5,408,219. That's a difference about $325,000. Is there a reason for the differential? Is it an inflationary change somewhere else, or?
If I may, through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Fryer. Yes, we don't necessarily include every piece, every dollar. There, for example, in the policing section, there was a reduction in the number of grants that we received, so there would be a reduction in spending as well. So I would say that 25,000 that you might be referring to could have been caught up in the miscellaneous. What that significant impacts chart is supposed to do is lead your, it's not for an entire department, it's for specific amounts to walk us through. So first of all, that I can verify the numbers that I have are in fact correct, and also provide you, members of council and the public, to see what the difference or the big differences are between 2022 and 23. So there may be a $25,000 amount there that's likely due to the grants.
Yeah, and as you said, like 25,000 is not going to make an awful lot of difference. It was just trying to match the numbers up, and the reason I was doing that, I was looking at that particular page because I was trying to look at the items that were showing a significant decrease that meant something, and that was kind of before I got into the further and saw the 300 about the OPP. So the Conservation Authority drops substantially, $500 and some $1,000. Has that been explained here? I'll readily admit that I may not have caught it. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Fryer. So with respect to the Conservation Authority, we have transferred the debentures for Black Ash Creek from the Conservation Authority department or subdepartment into the administrative department, because in fact the Conservation Authority isn't responsible for the Black Ash Creek debenture. So we've moved that to make it more in line, I suppose, with the program and service that it provides.
So would that be under the financial expenses then, or is it in one of these other divisions?
So yeah, it would have moved from Conservation Authority into administration or corporate management. It would be noted
management,
there.
which had a fairly hefty increase.
It had a big increase,
that's why.
for sure. Yeah.
So that's where that went. Similar with social housing, it was about a $191,000 reduction.
I may, through you, Your Worship. So for social housing, social housing changed because in the past we did not have Birch Street. That's one item that's included there. We also didn't have a housing, so we call it social and affordable housing now, because that is where the housing sorry, I can't think of the name, housing specialist is included, as well as the reduction from the 350,000 to the 125. So that's all packaged into that particular department.
Okay, and again, I wasn't, Mayor Hamlin, I wasn't coming back to each time, if that's okay, but I appreciate the chance to speak. So that's why those items didn't end up in our list of significant decreases, because they're incorporated into another facet of another division.
With respect to social and affordable housing, they were included in 2022. And the change you would see from 2022 to 2023 should be zero. Well, sorry, that's a lie. So social housing was separate from affordable housing. So you would be correct. Yes. Pardon me.
Okay. So I was looking at the unavoidable expenses, and of course, the one that jumps out at you the most is the salaries, the 1.17 million. And the number 13, the 150,000, and I was trying to relate that to the change in salary and benefits on page 19, for what that shows a total of 27,060,423, because that looks to me like a change of 1.7 million. So I think, in listening to what you've been talking about, I'm gathering that the 1.17 unavoidable is municipal tax related. The rest of the change in salary and benefit would be in non-user or non-tax.
If I may, it's actually twofold. So what you see on the unavoidable page is specifically the wage grid itself, contracts, CPP, EI, OMERS, the types of things that we can't control. They're in the overall change in salaries and benefits. The additional requests or the additional asks that we've included in your items to consider would be included in that as well. So that's why that total is higher.
With the 39,745 at the bottom. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
And purchase services in a lot of cases are contracts and things like that. So that's all incorporated into that as well. The change over there.
Any changes? Yes. So what we're showing as the change, as the total 39.7 municipal levy would be inclusive of the items for consideration and the unavoidable changes. Was that your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The reference on slide 19, before I go in, I have a couple of questions about that. On slide 19, you referred to the borrowing for 3.58 million. What's the borrowing for?
So that would be new debt for the Minnesota storm sewer repair.
And so was that previously approved by previous council?
We had included it in the 2022 budget, although the project was not completed in 2022.
Oh, I see. So they had approved to have additional debt, but the project didn't get done. So now we're coming forward and we're saying there will be additional debt.
When the project gets tendered, we often, at that point, there would be a staff report that would say, and we also need to fund this project. In the budget, it is funded through debentures, and that's what the treasurer recommends at this stage, and we'll need to put the wheels in motion to issue a new debenture.
Okay, so I heard your comments, and I'm quite pleased to hear that we're going to work towards getting some sort of a kind of an overall analysis of debt, and some reporting on the force. I know you will have a good handle on what's going to happen in the future. It's trying to put it down in a way that you can convey it to us, that we'll be able to incorporate it in our thinking as well, right? So I had been looking at the $100,000 in note number 4 under unavoidable, and that has to do with the long-term debt annual payments. And I had taken a glance at the financial statements because I was trying to get some answers in my head about that. And I'd seen the reduction was actually $141,000. So I'm assuming the 41,000 difference would be in regards to debt payments for the EPCOR portion of long-term debt, which we know is an in and out because there's a receivable as well for EPCOR.
So there would be that included as well, but also some of the debt, what I'm referring to is specific to the tax impact. And some of the debt is covered by development charges as well, for example, for the library. So any reduction in that, in any of that sort of non-tax supported would not be included in what I've presented to you on the graph, but would certainly be included in our financial statements.
Okay, so I was looking at the financial statements, as I said, trying to get a kind of an outlook for 24, 25 of where debt would be, and it stood out to me, and I may be out of my calculations because I hadn't been thinking about DCs directly in that, but it looks to me like the amount for I think it's $4,494,000 in long-term debt financing that's going to be paid in 2023. A large portion of that will go to the municipal debt we have. I didn't realize that we were possibly taking on 3.58. It may well just offset each other, because it looked to me like overall the tax-related debt would be in the order of $11 million at the end of 2023. But that was before I knew about the 3.58. And so, as I said, I'm just doing that to try to get my head wrapped around some things. And I'm not looking for an answer on that right now, but because you've talked about incorporating some focus on debt going forward and giving us some information about that. And the reason I'm getting into that is because of this whole $900,000 asset management shortfall, and the suggestions staff have made on how to get at that shortfall. I'm particularly interested in all that because the way I look at it is during the funding of the inquiry, I think approximately $6 million of what I referred to earlier, unfinanced expenditure treatment occurred. I'm aware that it was $8.5 million or so that is being shown as the total costs, but some of it was budgeted and incorporated into the municipal tax base. And whether I agree with that or not, in my view, I think the $6 million of funding from net operating surpluses in those years, and that was in spite of Finance's recommendations to utilize the EPCOR sales gross proceeds. So, in my opinion, that would have adhered to our financial policies, and if it had been done that way. So, I'd like to be looking at that, or I intend on looking at that from the perspective of, I believe there's basically been $6 million of borrowing that went into those funds that were put into the legacy funds. And I think that the things like the repayment of or all interest being turned back into the asset management plan, and some sort of a turnover as well to make up that long-term debt recovery needs to be considered and possibly pursued. So again, it comes right back to what you talked about, looking at all the components and trying to figure out what our debt situation is going to be going forward and such. And so I'll work on that some more, and I'll provide that to you, but that's the road I'm going to be trying to take, which I think could substantially help with that shortfall and hopefully help with my concern about tax levies, but we'll have to see.
If I may just interrupt you, Deputy Mayor, just to go back to the debenture amount that, we had also included as a proposal in our asset management plan, that part of the, a way to sort of reduce that gap would have been based on the fact that debentures would be falling off. And in 24 and 25 especially, there's a large fall off of what payments we will need to make towards debentures. I don't want to quote the amount of the total tax impact, but it is in the neighborhood of $1 million. So that will help greatly for sure. But I just wanted to address that one piece that you had mentioned. But certainly the discussion on how the JI plays, that's a much more wholesome discussion than I think we could complete here today.
I agree fully, and I agree with you. It'll be short term, really, a situation of what we have for outstanding debt, unless we take on other responsibilities. And again, the first one that I wasn't aware of was the 3.58.
Deputy Mayor, if I could just interrupt for 1 second. Generally, we're limited to speaking for 10 minutes on these kind of things, and you're about 14. I don't know if there's some matters that perhaps you could discuss offline with the treasurer, for some of your issues, and if you could sort of finish up in the next few minutes.
Certainly, if that's what you would wish, Mayor Hamlin. And then, as I said, I fully expect that we'll be talking about this for a while before we'll ever get it all sorted out. So,
okay, is that it then for now?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so I have a few questions. In terms of the study for a recreation center, I had read somewhere about an update to our master recreation plan, and I guess that would include this kind of facility. Is that updated study included in this budget?
If I may, I'm going to pull on Director Culver, but I will answer that there's two sort of studies included in the 2023 budget. One is specific to a multi-use recreation facility, which includes the library as well. So that is one study.
Okay.
And then what Director Culver has also included is a refresh on the strategic master plan for Parks and Rec. So I'll let him speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Pete.
Thank you, Mayor. So simply as the treasurer has mentioned, what we've been embarked upon is a refresh of our PRC master plan, which is a bit of an extension, taking a look at what's occurred in 2020 and 2021 and how things have changed, and making sure that we're in alignment with what the community is indicating as demands from our department. But also, as the treasurer's mentioned, there is a feasibility assessment for a multi-use rec facility in the 2023 budget, subject to your approval. And that's what we'll be looking at, that including scoping that includes potential for the library in the future as well.
Okay, thank you. And while you're there, I noticed there was an amount for the completion of the feasibility study for the Arts Entertainment Center. Is that in addition to the work that's currently ongoing by the consultant?
So no, through to you, Mayor. That's a continuation of the project that began with council's approval later last year. This past term, and so we're still in phase 2 and looking to complete it around April. Subject to everything going correctly. At which point we would return to council and look at phase 3, which would be a new ask.
And do we have that covered off in the budget, or should we at this point?
So we don't currently, because we're not sure what the direction will be out of phase 2, but council placed money into an Arts Center Reserve or an Arts and Culture Reserve, which would be where we would probably be recommending funding.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Under the one of the items was municipal law enforcement staff, and I noticed under the duties that were listed, one that was not listed was enforcement of our short-term accommodation issues. And I know, or I understand, there's going to be a report coming from staff to this council at some point on what their recommendations might be. Are there funds in this budget for the enforcement of whatever we're going to need for short-term accommodation rules?
If I may, I'm going to direct you to Clerk Almas to help answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. We are expecting a report in our next standing committee cycle on short-term accommodation, in which we will have to be having a conversation with which direction this council wants to go and any potential changes we require with zoning, potentially bylaw too, and ensuring our official plan is compliant with the decision of council.
So do we need funds? I'm just wondering, I mean, of course, we don't know where we're going yet, but however we end up, we sure have heard from our community they want the STAs, enforced. Like they want our bylaw enforced.
Certainly our current licensing officer that is retained to undertake the research for this and a few other special projects for us is contracted until next November. So we do have personnel available for assistance with that, and we'll have to decide from there what's required.
Okay, thank you. One of the items listed was a favorite of mine, which is making sure the pavement markings on our main streets are always visible, which to me was a major safety issue, particularly with so many visitors and tourists coming into our town. I noticed that 6th Street was not one of the ones listed. And for me, I have a question about why that wouldn't be included, because I do see it as a bit of a continuation from High through to Hume Street. And my other question related to that is, should we be considering roads that currently have painted bike lanes? And my question, I think, is for Director Slama. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. So we can, I'd like to go back and just confirm, kind of basically how many kilometers we've looked at with what we have presented in a budget. And if you are requesting that we include 6th Street, then I can report back on if we'd need to add to that, if our recommendation would be to add more, additional kilometers for 6th Street, and the same thing with the bike lanes. Would that help in the next round of decisions?
Yeah. Okay. For the new members of council, what we discovered last term is that the province changed the standards for paint you can use on the road. So they're more environmentally friendly, which is a good thing. But the bad thing is it only lasts about 8 months. And our budget accounts for painting once a year. So that's why the lanes disappear. So we're just talking about a second painting. Okay, thank you. My next question is about the urban forestry unit, which I believe our past council also thought was a good idea. Having sat at the county orientation session yesterday with our deputy mayor, we learned the county has 133,000 acres of forest. And so they have quite a robust forestry unit full of arborists and others. So I just wanted to, leave with staff whether they have a service that member municipalities could take advantage of that might be financially viable. I just have 2 more things. One is the roads plan, and I know there's a few roads listed, but I specifically had 2 questions, and probably not an answer today. But one is, I heard, and I'm sure others did, so much about the condition of High Street. And so I'll just ask right now, what is the plan for redoing High Street? And because of the, significant problems with it, if it's far off in the future, can we do repairs in the interim? Over to you, Director Slama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have included in the budget some work to continue with the Class EA, which we started in 22, but that's for the more, I'm going to say, the southerly half of High Street from Creekside. I'm sorry, I forget the name of the street, south to Poplar Side Road. So to look at that and continuing with some road reconstruction to expand the lanes and active transportation and on all those elements. With respect to First Street to Third Street, we do have some work in future budgets, some temporary repair work on that area, and we have always, in the previous budgets, we have included some of the work that includes the intersection at Third and High, which really is driven by development. And so I believe we did not include that this year because we haven't seen that go forward. So we did take that out, so for council's awareness. So there is that opportunity to, if you want to consider bringing forward some work that we're planning for in the future to bring it forward to this budget. We could, I guess I would like some more specific direction kind of on what exactly you're looking at so that we can provide some information for council to make an educated decision.
I think maybe I should just break down my question. One is, when would the reconstruction of High Street take place in the normal course that you're planning for?
Off the top of my head, I just need to check our asset management plan. I don't recall when I have where we
so
have
then
it.
my next question, and please, go off and think about it, is, given the state of that road, and I've had several people write me and say they're sure the underside of their car's being damaged. So it's in that context, not how it looks. I'm just wondering if there's some interim measures between when you're going to rebuild the road and today to make it just a little more user-friendly. So if you could give that some thought, I'd appreciate it. Okay, and the other thing is, there was a mention of an operational plan coming forward in the new year. Will that come forward with the budget in January, or is that after the budget?
If I may, I will call on CEO Skinner to help answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The timing that we've had in the last 2 years, because we started the operational plan as a pilot 2 years ago and then ran it all through this year, 2022, is that we've followed the budget with the operational plan. So typically the budget will be finalized, and then we'll report back to council a month or so, possibly 2 months. Usually there's an approval in December, and we try to come forward in February or so with the full listing of projects. So it would follow your direction on the overall budget.
So just related to that, I think what would be helpful for our community is if they had a sense of what the roads plan was, say for 5 years. So they might know, oh, this section of Maple is so bad, but I know in 3 years it'll be done. Or what if that could be included in some fashion, I think that would be really helpful. So my last thought is, or comments, has to do with the affordable housing budget. And I did get an email from the chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force 2 days ago, which he asked me to relay to council. And it is asking us to consider putting the $350,000 into the 2022 budget, as was done, in the 2023 budget, as was done in 2022, which was estimated at 1% of the municipal tax revenues. So I'll just read you this part of it. While acknowledging that only a small portion of the original budget allocation has been used to date, we understand this to be an urgent need moving forward. The Affordable Housing Reserve Fund must be added to and built up over the coming years in the event that any of the following initiatives were deemed by council to be appropriate. And then they list about 8. The creation of a municipal not-for-profit housing corporation in which affordable housing projects can be funded. Funding of a municipally wide community improvement plan supporting affordable housing projects. Acquisition of lands to be held within a community land trust. Financial incentives to support the rapid accessory development unit development. Options for other incentive programs not yet identified. Affordable housing project capital cost contributions, and they have in brackets, resulting in prioritization by CMHC, and lastly, consultant and legal fees in the development of all of the above. So I wanted to convey that because they're of the view that we need to have a bit of a savings fund going forward to take advantage of what we need to do. And I'll say that having looked through the items that we can include or not include, I just offer these comments. I think if I had to support $350,000 into the Affordable Housing Fund this year, I would consider whether we could forego for this year the drone show alternative to fireworks, which was $65,000. The Heritage Review at $100,000, and I say that in part because we know there's all kinds of changes coming to that program in any event through Bill 23. And the other one that's on my mind is the UN conference, which is estimated at $50,000. We've done that for the last 3 years in conjunction with Habitat and Humanity, and we certainly carry the burden of putting that conference on, and it has been a great conference, and I think we have a lot of good ideas coming out of it. But I'm just wondering if this is the year we should maybe ask for a pause on that and take some of those good ideas and actually use them to build the affordable housing we've been talking about. And in addition, when Council decided to embark on this conference with the Habitat UN, it was on the understanding that they would be able to bring funds and partners to the table when we embarked on our affordable housing projects. So I'd say maybe this is the year we say, okay, maybe we should take a pause on the conference, but let's get a project or two going, because that's what our community is telling us we need. We need those rental housing units for people who work in our community, and see if now's the time that the UN Habitat and the Urban Economy Forum can bring their contacts to bear and help us get a project or two underway. So those are my initial comments on the budget. Thank you. Okay, so if there's no other questions or comments, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Miriam. So just in relationship to your comments with respect to the affordable housing funds, I know part of the conversation we had last term was our ability to maybe tap into, at the end of the year, any given year, if we had a forecasted surplus, that we would be able to use that. And I'm wondering if we can use that approach, that we would commit to what staff's recommendation to reduce the 350 by 225, but with a commitment of council before we distribute to the reserves through the bylaw that's in place, that we would have the opportunity to top that up to the 350 fully, if that's possible in our process.
Can I ask a question related to that? I hear, and maybe I'll just explain for the new council members. So, staff sets a budget. We approve a budget with their assistance, and sometimes at the end of the year, all the money's not spent. So it's called a surplus. What happens to the surplus? So there's a bylaw that was passed a number of years ago, and it says the surplus goes into reserve funds. Which is our savings accounts at the town. So I believe what Councillor Jeffrey's suggesting is, if we don't increase the amount for affordable housing in this budget back up to 350, that we amend that bylaw to say the surplus that's left at the end of 23 should go into topping up the affordable housing amount to 350. Is that a good summary of what you've said?
Yeah, well, thank you,
Yeah.
Mary Helen. What I was saying is that might be a solution to the question I asked. Is that possible in the process? Do we have to amend the bylaw? Could we simply kind of usurp it ahead of time and put the money into affordable housing before we do the distribution?
Okay, which of staff would like to answer that question?
I think it's two-part. I'm going to rely on the clerk a little bit on the bylaw.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the reserve policy is a bylaw, but rather just a policy where it states how the surplus is allocated. And I need to do my math on that or check my background. But I would also say that there is a series of steps And it says first it goes into operating if we've met that, and if we have that targeted balance, then it goes here, and then it slowly. So it might be in the situation where, you know, those things have all been okay and we have the funds. But what I was thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, that you were thinking was that it would be the 2022 surplus that we use, and then it would offset so that we could technically go up to the 350 in 2023 without actually using anything. So I'd have to check, but I think it's a policy and not actually a bylaw. So we'd have to come back and just do that investigation, but we can definitely.
Okay, well, thank you for raising that. I think, was the surplus last year, sorry, I'll just ask this supplementary question. Was it 800,000? Is that?
Yeah, just a wee bit above that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's a great idea. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And that whole discussion about, in my mind, I haven't talked about zero-based budgeting or anything like that because the Treasury refers to it as a balanced budget. And I think you've done your utmost to try to make sure we're looking at this as a zero-based budget. And that's where you figure we're going to be at the end of the year. I recognize there could be surpluses. The tendency has been for surpluses to show up. I've had a little bit of difficulty with the size of them. And then, as I said, I think there's going to be a whole discussion about the allocation because of what happened in previous years with the way the surplus is handled, because I think it's affected the asset management plan. So I intend on speaking that, and that's nothing against affordable housing. I believe very strongly we have to continue to put money into it, but the whole discussion about surpluses and borrowing from other reserves and that's something I want to get into. So
okay, thank you for those comments. Okay, so now we have the motion that is before us that staff has presented. Oh, okay. Right, thank you. So it's on the deck that was handed out at the beginning of our session at 2 o'clock. It's on the back. It's slide 23. So there's three parts to this. I'll start with the first one. We'll discuss each one and then vote on it. So the first motion is that the Strategic Initiatives Committee directs staff to organize engagement opportunities for the public to provide their 2023 budget input to Council prior to final consideration. Could I have a mover and a seconder on that one? Yeah, Deputy Mayor Fryer and Councillor Potts. Thank you. So the second one, and I'll just read it, it's that the committee directs staff to create two proposed budget scenarios. Oh, I didn't call the vote. Okay, let's vote on that, shall we? I thought it was such a no-brainer. Okay, all in favor. Thank you. Okay, second one. That the committee directs staff to create two proposed budget scenarios with tax rate increases of pick a percent and pick another percent. So this, I think is self-explanatory. The suggestion is for the second meeting or for the second draft of the budget, we could ask staff to, for example, say, show us what it would look like if the tax increase was 4%. Or 10%, or we can pick what we want. Is there, yes, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to suggest that we defer that until after our consultation with the public. Let's at least let them feedback before we start presupposing what our budget should look like.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Would anyone like to move and second this particular part of the motion? Yes.
We'll move it.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So the clerk is just saying we don't have to put this on the floor. It's simply if someone would like to set a tax rate for staff to come back with the new numbers. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And I think that idea will work fine because the treasurer already has put 2 scenarios on the table. And the starting point that I like is 0, and that's there as well. And I don't think we'd need adjustment unless there was something specifically out of those 2 categories of change that we thought was out. And so I think it would be fine to work with the information you've put together. I think it's excellent.
So you're supporting basically Councillor Doherty's suggestion to wait?
What staff's presented is available to the public to understand the impacts. Yes.
Okay. Any other comments or anyone who'd like to put this on the floor? Okay. And the third part, I'll just read it out, that the committee directs staff to include the following items from the items for consideration list or other sources in the proposed budget scenarios. So in other words, is there anything you would like to add? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Sorry, to add or, okay, never mind. I misunderstood that one.
Is that right, what it says?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we did make a motion tonight to add some things which we felt were critical to have, it would change. We would almost have 3 scenarios. We'd have the scenario the base scenario, we'd have the scenario in the middle, and then the 5.31 scenarios. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Because
yes, we'll just hear from CEO Skinner briefly. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I just wanted to clarify that the next time staff are intending to bring forward. So should ask us tonight to put certain things in. That would be the next time. Copy with council.
Okay.
With public necessary. Guide to direct us to do would.
Okay, so then I think that I will make a motion, understanding that. But the 2 that I would like to add in at this point is definitely the community-based strategic plan items, which are 4C, I believe, and 4D of $25,000 each. I think they're pretty critical for us moving forward, and I think any public would reasonably expect that we would go to them, talk to them before we created our 4-year strategic plan.
Okay. Would you like?
I'm moving it. I don't know if there's a seconder or not, but I.
Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Yep, I apologize. I'm a bit confused. My understanding is that all of the items that have been presented to us today are in that right now, items for consideration. And so you would just be confirming what's already there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Treasurer maybe could just clarify
Take everything else out, but.
the intent. Yeah.
So if I may, just to clarify what staff were expecting, and of course subject to council's discretion. But so for our Monday meeting to meet with the public, what we're going to show is exactly what we've presented today, in the sense that all of the things that we've talked about will be included in there. And Councillor Jeffrey and I had a brief conversation at the break, so maybe she's seeing what I was trying to envision. And for the virtual session, for example, what we'll be doing is making it as interactive as possible, praying that people show up on it, and provide them with, would you over A versus B, or would you, if you only had $1 million to add after the 1.78, how would you rank these things, and to get sort of interactive sort of speech or dialogue going with the residents. And also we'll do that in person as well. A little bit more difficult, but we're going to try and do that. So we're going to present the exact same thing that the draft 1 shows you. And then when we get to December 5th, the idea is, if council said today, we want you to bring us 2 scenarios, because the 5.31, albeit it is a scenario, it doesn't necessarily reflect the priorities it reflects everything and not maybe, prioritizing in total what council might want to provide direction to. So our expectation maybe, and rightly or wrongly, was if you provide us with a percentage, 2 different percentages, to give you 2 scenarios that says, let staff say, here's the priorities and here's what we absolutely have to do. And then on top of that, if there are particular items that cannot be omitted or cannot be included, then that would be part of the motion as well. So that when we get to December 5th, you are going to hear what the public had to say at the 2 public meetings that we're going to hold. And you would see a second draft that included the things that members of council wanted to be part of the budget with the 2 different scenarios that you may level off at, say, 4 and 6% or 3 and 5% or whatever that number might be. Does that make sense? Or have I confused you even more?
Yes, no, I think we understand that, and perhaps there's some reluctance at the table to give a percentage right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Councillor Jeffrey, is this a motion you're bringing now? Yeah.
Yes.
So do you have a seconder for that motion?
Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Baines.
My apologies. Can you ask Councillor Jeffries to reread her motion then?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Hamlin, to Councillor Baines. My motion is simply to add or to ensure in whatever scenario we're presenting or when the time is right, that for sure we are including 4C and 4D, which are $25,000 each, which facilitate our engagement with the public on a community-based strategic plan.
Okay. I'll second that.
Any discussion? Yes, Deputy Mayor Fryer.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. At this stage, I wouldn't be prepared to support anything in regards to firmly saying this is going to be in. So,
okay, thank you. Councillor Doherty?
Again, I do apologize, but I'm looking for clarification. So is this to propose that everything else is excluded?
Go ahead, answer.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Hamlin. Yes, I think your request is you wanted further public input on those other items of consideration, but I'm saying I don't think we should be waiting on the 25,000 each. I don't know why we wouldn't be engaging in a refresh of our our community-based strategic plan.
I agree 100%, but it just there are any number of items that are included here that I would also want to open up. I mean, we could be in discussion now for the next 3 hours, just what should be in there. So my thinking is, let's just leave it.
Okay. Would anyone else like to comment on this? I'll just say I'm not sure as to D whether I've been on the fence about whether we should spending $25,000 on surveying our community on what their priorities are, and I would like to have a discussion at some point with our council, and maybe the 5th will be the time. But do we feel we have a good enough understanding, having spoken to our community over the last few months, or do we think a survey would be warranted? And I'll just ask our go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to be clear on what this one is, knowing that council, may or may not want it. We have had it in the strategic plan for several years now. And the intention is to have an Ipsos or a Reed or a like company that does statistically significant surveys, pose a number of questions to our community that you would be engaged in crafting around what their priorities are. So unlike the typical Engage Collingwood work that we do, where we get, 50 to 800 responses. This would be more like trying to penetrate deeper into all the strata of our community to get some idea to you as decision fodder around what people see as their priorities and what they want from you as a council in the next 4 years. That said, many of you have been knocking on doors and maybe you feel you have that information, but certainly from a staff perspective, it's not something that we've had in hand previously here in Collingwood.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. So let's vote now, unless someone else has a comment, any other comment on Councillor Jeffrey's motion. Did you want to speak to it again?
No, Mayor, I just wanted to say, Mayor Hamlin, if you want to sever them, given the information, or that maybe you would wish to be able to vote on C and D separately.
Did you want them severed?
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to sever. So the first part of the motion is to include item 4C, which is $25,000 for the strategic plan refresh, and other than D, exclude the other items. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Opposed? Okay, then that fails. And the other item is item 4D, which is the $25,000 for the strategy survey, priority strategy survey. All those in favor? Opposed?
I would have withdrawn it.
Okay, fails. Okay, thank you for raising that, though.
Yeah. That's fine.
All right, and I believe now, subject to what our clerk might tell us, we're ready to adjourn. Okay, motion for adjourn. Oh.
No, from the CO's perspective, no, thank you, and appreciate the insights that have been shared by the public and council today, and it will help us to prepare the next draft.
Councillor Dory, did you want to add something?
Yes, I just want to ask a question that I maybe should have asked before I voted, but we have, at this point in time, declined to support Councillor Jeffrey's motion, but these two items are still in the budget. Okay, that's great.
And actually, I have one question as well. For the Monday virtual meeting of council with the public, is council to come here for that, or are we participating from our own offices?
You can participate in your own office's home or office. Yeah,
Okay.
we're not expected to come here. No.
Okay, thank you. CO Skinner.
I was remiss also not to thank our wonderful treasurer and our manager who put the material together. I wish to recognize that a lot of work was done and will continue with them, the department heads and managers.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. And for the adjournment, we have Councillor Jeffrey and all those in favor. Okay, all in favor. We voted to adjourn. Thank you, everyone.